Morning. Good morning to Sharing Training Excellence in Medical Education. This isn't really a day two, it's a new day one. But for some folks who's returning, welcome back to today's themed meeting entitled Innovation in Healthcare Education, which we're all hopefully looking forward to very much. As yesterday, unfortunately, I have quite a lot of things that I need to say, so I've got a list. So first things first, if you're like me and you can't remember to turn off your phone, do it now, because, or put it on silent at least, because as you know, the plenaries are being live streamed and recorded, and it's distracting for the people when phones are ringing all the time. Can you all make sure that there's enough space for the people who are coming in a little? There was some concern about a fire. There would be voice instructions which would tell us what to do, whether that would be to be aware or to evacuate. And if we have to evacuate the building, the quickest route would be down the stairs on that side or on that side, and we'll meet in the car park. We have Wi-Fi on all the floors. On this floor, the Wi-Fi network is the Rico suite, and the password is Rico Diamond, which should be in your packs, in your booklets. We also have a Twitter hashtag, and there was a lot of tweeting occurring yesterday, and we would be hoping for the same today. The hashtag is WDSTEME18, so please feel free to tweet away. There are many stands outside, and we visited them yesterday. There's a big amount of educational resource available outside, and I would really encourage you to visit the stands. The Postgraduate Education Support Team also have a stand outside, and we are able to answer your questions, concerns, or comments outside on the stand. The quality team folks are around, and they're all wearing purple T-shirts. Well, not all, but most of us are wearing purple T-shirts. And we're there to help. Just remember, we all got up really early in the morning, so be nice. I've already said the plenaries are being live streamed. Where's Malcolm? Malcolm, can you stand up for a second? So, thanks, Malcolm. Dr. Malcolm Gudgeroch, Associate Dean for Quality, is going to be moderating the online forum. And if there's any urgent, pressing questions, Malcolm will ask them on behalf of all the folks who are online. Recordings of this event for colleagues who are not able to attend today will be made available on the Wales Deanery website as CPD, or maybe if you want to look again at one of the plenaries, it will be available to see. There are time for questions at the end of each plenary. May I just, at the risk of sounding patronizing, say a question is a question, so if you could keep your questions to being a question, that would be appreciated. Because if we want to discuss, we can discuss it outside during one of the many breaks. If you can wait when you're asking your question for the microphone to arrive, because of course the people on live stream won't be able to hear you, and it's important that the whole audience can hear the question and the response. There are workshops this afternoon, and in case I forget to say it this afternoon, after lunch we go into our workshops, then there's a coffee break, then there's another set of workshops, and then we are free to leave. We won't come back here again in the afternoon, but I'll say that again at lunchtime. There is a room change. Megan McBrien's Talk CPR workshop will be in the Sony suite and not on this floor. You are invited to vote in our poster competition. We will be announcing the results of that later today. There is an online evaluation survey, which is really important to us, because after each of these training events, we like to make rapid changes and innovate for the next program. So your feedback is really important to us. After you've completed your evaluation, you'll be able to download your attendance certificate. we are very grateful for having many, many speakers that has travelled a long way to come today. And I'm really looking forward to today's theme of innovation in healthcare education. So I'm looking back to see if I've forgotten to say anything. Is there anything else I've forgotten, do we think? Not yet. Okay, great. In which case, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our colleagues from the General Medical Council. So Suzanne Redwood, Suzanne Gannon-Lewis, and Rosie King are all here, and they are going to, having travelled all the way from sunny London, to come and give us a General Medical Council update. And as always, I think there'll be something new for us to reflect upon. Thank you very much.
Oh, good morning, everyone. It's great to see such a lovely, large turnout today. And I'm Susan Redwood from the London office of the GMC, and I travelled from cloudy London yesterday. And with me is Suzanne Gannon-Lewis from the Wales office. So we're going to talk about three areas today. I'm going to introduce some key themes from the 2018 National Training Surveys, and also some work that we are commencing on evaluating the Recognition of Trainers program. And Suzanne's going to talk about our impending publication of the Reflective Practice Guidance. First of all, I want to highlight some initial findings from this year's surveys. As you're all aware, the surveys generate powerful data which we use for our quality assurance activities, and which deaneries and deaneries and local offices use to help improve medical education and training. The views from doctors in training and trainers across the United Kingdom are very important to us as they share their experience of training and the environments where they work. Trainers also report their experience of the training environment from their perspective, both as clinical or educational supervisors. That helps us to understand the current situation and changes over time. This year, just over 19,000 trainers completed the survey. This slide shows the response rate by trainers, and I am delighted to inform you that the highest response rate came from Wales, where trainers in Wales completion was at almost 62%. So thank you and congratulations on that. We will be publishing our key survey findings later in the year, but I can share some initial findings with you. The 2018 data shows a worsening picture in relation to finding time for training, but there are some small improvements around workload. They show some highlights around the experience of being a trainer. The slide sets out the question about finding time to be a trainer. It shows whether trainers in Wales feel they're able to use the time allocated to training in their job plans to actually train, compared with the overall result for trainers in the UK. This year, a third of trainers disagreed or strongly disagreed with this. This result shows a slight trend for the worse. Fewer trainers feel they're able to use their allocated time to train than the previous 2 years. A further question we had was about time in the job plan, whether my job plan contains enough designated time for my role as a trainer. Just over half of trainers agreed their job plan contains enough designated time for their role as a trainer. And this is a slight improvement on last year's figure. This year we included a new question around burnout. Do you feel burnout because of your work? There are increasing concerns about the impact of working condition on doctors' well-being, with fears that pressures could lead to burnout. Work-related burnout is a state of prolonged and psychological exhaustion perceived as related to the person's work. In recent years, we have worked with doctors to explore how we can sensitively measure these issues through the National Training Survey. This year, we included optional questions about workplace burnout for the first time. We hope that doctors feel comfortable with the way we have approached this. We understand that these questions have felt challenging for some, but by hearing the views of trainees and trainers, we will better understand the factors associated with the feelings of burnout. Later this year, we'll provide a more in-depth analysis of the burnout questions by country, age group and specialty, as well as considering what burnout means for training outcomes and the profession more widely. In the meantime, the initial findings include that almost 1 in 4 trainees and just over 1 in 5 trainers say they feel burnout because of their work. Feelings of burnout are slightly more prevalent amongst trainers and trainees in England and Wales. The results are stark. Long and intense working hours, heavy workloads and the challenges of frontline medical practice are affecting doctors' training experience and their personal well-being. Together, these findings present a worrying picture. Highly pressurised environments struggle to prioritise training in the face of an increasing population with more complex health needs, constrained budgets and a medical profession at a crunch point, where the supply of new doctors has failed to keep pace with changes in demand. However, although there are challenges in this year's survey results, we must also say that the majority of trainees remain satisfied with their overall training educational experience, which is a testament to the dedication and hard work of trainers who train them. But as we said in last year's Training Environments report, medical training cannot continue to rely on the goodwill of senior doctors. Our promoting excellence standards are very clear. Trainees must be educated in high-quality, safe and effective environments where trainers are also well supported in their roles. We are taking action to address these concerns. We are writing to all employers across the UK to reinforce their obligation to protect time for training and to set out how we expect governance boards and senior leaders to scrutinise their survey data to identify improvements to the training posts and programs they are responsible for. Where we find evidence that this is not happening and our standards are not being met, we can and will take action. In Wales, we're working closely with our local partners and the BMA in particular to find ways to improve the consistency of rota monitoring and to better support doctors in training. We also started a UK-wide review to look at the factors that impact on the well-being of medical students and doctors, led by Professor Michael West and Dame Denise Coyer. Their findings will enable us to work together with organisations across the UK to agree priority areas for collaborative action that can help tackle the causes of poor well-being. We'll also analyse the 2018 survey results in detail across the countries, specialties and sites to provide a detailed report for a publication later this year. So now, the second topic I want to talk about is the recognition of trainers' work and the work that we're putting in place to evaluate the trainers' framework, which was implemented over a number of years, but finally in place by 2016. It's a very important piece of work for us because excellent educational supervision is patient safety in 15 years. Excellent clinical supervision is patient safety now. Just to recap, remind us what we wanted to achieve with the recognition of trainers' framework. The 3 main goals were to raise the profile of trainers, to protect resources for training and value and promote training, to support and professionalise trainers by establishing criteria and expectations around the support and resources that trainers should expect to receive, and to help improve the standards of education and training. Our standards promoting excellence place emphasis. One of the 5 themes of the standards is supporting educators, and the requirements for recognition of trainers are included in the standards. So require that all trainers are selected against suitable criteria, that they receive induction and training for their role, and appraisal against their educational responsibilities. One of the outcomes of the recognition of trainers is that the doctors who've been recognised as trainers now have this on the register, so you should all have this doctor as a trainer recognised by the GMC on your pay record on the register. So I don't know if you've had a look, but it should be there. So I just want to cover where we are now with the recognition of trainers' work. Over the period of time that this was implemented between 2011 and now, we know a lot more about trainer population, and we've established standards for quality of training. There are approximately 60,000 named postgraduate trainers and 1,000 named undergraduate trainers. But one of the things that is still the case for trainers is that there continue to be system pressures impacting on education and training. So now I just want to talk about the evaluation we're planning to undertake of the recognition of trainers program. All the milestones were met, and now the ongoing process of recognising trainers is in place, and we have around 60,000 trainers recognised. It's our obligation to understand the impact of this program and to ensure that the system runs to the benefit of those who are required to use it, and to make changes to improve it where appropriate. So this is what we intend to do, is carry out an evaluation to look at the impact of recognition of trainers on the quality of training, look at what factors are enablers or barriers to the framework, and look at what are the risks and benefits to maintaining the quality of trainers and the implications for the framework. So we will be carrying out a qualitative independent research on trainers to evaluate the impact on training, inform our decisions on the recognition of trainers' future, and allow us to engage with those responsible for recognition in practice. Earlier this year, we did carry out some engagement with a number of organisations to help us inform the proposal that we're putting out to tender, and we did have a very useful session with the Wales Deanery and the medical schools in Wales to understand how the recognition of trainers has been implemented in Wales. We have now a formal document that will shortly, later this month, be put out for tender to have bids come in to carry out this research. So we hope that that will be completed around late October and November, and that work will be carried out later this year and early next year to inform the future of the program and improvements we wish to make. So we think it's extremely important that after all the work that's been put in place to recognise trainers, that we do carry out a thorough evaluation of its benefits and anything that does need improvement, and that will inform the future of the program. So that's what I wanted to cover with recognition of trainers this morning, and I'm now going to pass over to Suzanne, who's going to talk about some work that we've also been doing.
Bore da, good morning. I'm Suzanne Gannon-Lewis. I don't know if I've met some of you before. So I'm the Liaison Advisor for Wales. Excuse me. Is everybody in the room aware that we actually have a local office in Wales? Is everybody? Yeah. We're based in Cardiff Bay. We're a small team, as you can see, but we do work very closely with all agencies in Wales to make sure that the work that the GMC is doing stays relevant to the local context, and obviously that we can hear messages back from doctors and doctors in training, medical students in Wales, and feed that back to the main GMC. So, as we said, today I'm going to talk a little bit about the reflective practitioner, a topic that's been talked about a lot recently. I'm not going to give an overview on reflective practice. I'm sure everybody is very aware of what reflective practice is. But I just put this diagram up, which actually comes from the reflective practice toolkit taken from the Academy and CopMed's recent toolkit that they've produced. Because I think it just sums up nicely the importance of reflective practice, because we all know that it's important for doctors to reflect and how it can benefit their own practice as well as, of course, ultimately patient safety. So it's always been well recognised that reflective practice is an important part of everything that doctors and medical students do. And of course, it's been covered in the guidance for some time now in various places. It's part of the generic professional capabilities, where it says it's an ability to learn from and reflect on your professional practice and clinical outcomes. And, as I'm sure most of you are aware, that this is part of the revalidation requirements for doctors in training. So this has been a well-known and well-talked about topic for some time. But recently there have been some concerns about the areas of reflection, which we will cover in a bit more detail in a moment, which is why we wanted to give you some hot off the press information that as of tomorrow, some new piece of guidance that has been co-produced with the AOMRC, CopMed, GMC and the MSc is being launched to try and provide some more clarity on what is expected around reflection and how reflection can be used, to respond to some of the concerns that have been raised about how reflections might be used when doctors write them and what should be included in those, and to just give some further tools and processes that can help doctors and doctors in training know what might be the most appropriate way to record their reflections as they move forward. There's been a lot of this has been asked of us to provide those levels of clarification and to respond to some of those concerns. And that is why this piece of guidance has been put together. So how did we do it? Well, we held some workshops across the UK, which were held in Edinburgh, in Cardiff, in Belfast and in London, I believe. And I don't know whether any of you here were involved in the Cardiff one. Did anybody attend? So these workshops listen to the views of doctors in training, medical students, educators and trainers to ask them what are their current feelings about the current system of reflection and reflective practice, what some of their concerns might be, and to look at some of the potential ideas for moving forward. So this may not be a great surprise to you. The feedback from some of the workshops included concerns that it had very much become a box-ticking exercise, that some doctors were frustrated at this, and that it had become almost like a forced reflection. It's not really embedded into learning and practice, and that there is too little space and time to really reflect, to make it meaningful to somebody's learning process. So that it just became part of assessment, but not really one that actually informed learning. And of course, that is the main purpose of reflection and reflective practice is to learn from some of those challenges, as well as some of those positive outcomes, to see how we can build on that knowledge, build on those experiences, and ultimately move forward for patient safety. There was also this concern that reflections always seem to focus on serious negative incidents and negative experiences, which of course didn't make the whole reflective process an enjoyable one always, and that actually it would be useful to learn from some of those positive experiences and positive scenarios as well, to have that balance so that we can learn from when things go well and what was happening there that enabled that to happen, as well as obviously learning from the more concerning issues. Some of the other concerns and frustrations were around an inconsistency of approach, not really knowing which way is the most appropriate way for where you are and who you're working with, and of course the ultimate time pressures of having, actually having that time and space to be able to reflect in a way that is meaningful and purposeful. And finally, of course, the recent case involving Dr. Bauer-Garber brought some of these issues into sharp relief, with concerns that reflections were actually being used to penalise doctors through legal proceedings. And there's been a lot of discussion about that, and hopefully some of those concerns will have been addressed in the guidance and in recent publications. So we listened to some of this feedback, quite comprehensive feedback, and we looked at some of the requests that came from that. So there was, as I just mentioned, requests for more support to have a range of reflections, so different ways of reflecting, covering both positive and negative incidents, with more flexibility on how that can actually take place. So how you can do it, who you can do it with, etc. So the focus around this flexibility was with a focus on learning points and an action plan that comes from it, rather than just a narrative of an experience, which then, of course, just becomes descriptive rather than reflective. But also, one of the other requests was for more support around variety and examples of reflective practice and how to do it, acknowledging that reflections always don't need to be written down on a form, and also don't need to include every detail of a specific event, but actually that it is about the learning, and that recording that there has been a reflective discussion with a supervisor or appraiser can be enough. So these were some of the requests that came out of these workshops. So we've listened to this feedback. We've also listened to the feedback from our co-producers and their stakeholders and their stakeholder events, and brought all of that together to help inform this new piece of co-produced guidance. For example, we've ensured that all of these above points are referenced within the final document of the guidance. So, what does it say? So, as has been requested, the guidance acts as a short guide to support medical students, doctors in training and doctors engaged in revalidation on how to reflect as part of their practice. And it highlights 10 key points on being a reflective practitioner. So, of course, reflection is personal. There's no one way to reflect, and there are a variety of tools. I'm sure you're aware of many of them. There is a toolkit that addresses some of them, but whether it's Kolb, Gibbs, the so what, now what, how, whichever. There's various different methods and ways of reflection. So whichever fits best with that particular learner and their learning style will help with the quality of reflections. So having time to reflect. Time is always the biggie, I'm fully aware of that. But this has been one of the key points, is having that time to reflect on both positive and negative experiences, and being supported in that ability to reflect. This is really important for individuals' well-being and their development and their personal development moving forward, you know, as we've sort of already talked about. Group reflection. This was a point that was raised a lot, particularly in the Cardiff workshop. This often leads to really good ideas or actions that really can improve patient care. So being able to sort of spark those ideas off one another is seen as a really positive way of reflection. The healthcare team should have the opportunities to reflect and discuss openly and honestly what has happened, particularly when things have gone wrong, and being able to give that sort of trusted space to be able to do that. Now, this is the important one that is raised. I mean, they're all important, but this is particularly poignant at the moment, that a reflective note does not need to capture the full details of an experience. What it should capture is the learning outcomes and the future plans that will come out of that particular piece of work and that particular incident. So it's not about just recording the narrative. And that actually reflection should not substitute or override other processes that are necessary to record or escalate a significant concern. If a significant event has happened, of course, there are other avenues that can be taken where that can be recorded in full, in far more detail. As I'm sure you're all familiar with, when keeping a note and a reflective note, then all reflections should be anonymised as far as possible. There's been lots of guidance previously around what is, classed as I can never say it, anonymity, and how far you go to anonymise, particularly if you're working in small communities. And it gives this clarity. One of the things that was asked for was clarity. And the GMC does not ask for reflective notes in fitness to practice hearings. So the GMC have said that they will never ask a doctor for this. However, they can choose to offer their own reflections as evidence of insight into their practice should they come to a fitness to practice hearing. One of the things it also clarifies is that reflective notes can currently be required by a court, but they should, as we've already said, focus on the learning and the action plan that follows from that. Any factual details, as I've already said, should be recorded in far more detail elsewhere. And finally, tutors, supervisors, appraisers and employers should support that time and space for both individual and group reflection. So these are sort of the 10 points that the guidance covers. And basically, doctors in training should include insights gained and any changes made to practice in their learning portfolio. And supervisors can confirm in the learning portfolio that the experience has been discussed and agree appropriate learning outcomes and actions that are needed. So one of the key points, again, that comes out of those workshops and those requests was to have more tools. So there is a link within the guidance to this piece of supporting material done by the AOMRC and COPMed, which is a toolkit which describes the principles for effective and reflective practice and actually gives some templates and examples for people to use. Another thing that we are working on is some supportive learning materials and some case studies that will eventually be uploaded onto the GMC website as well, so that anybody can have a look and use those. So finally, next steps, where are we going with this? So this will be launched tomorrow, but in the near future, we're looking at supporting that with some potential supplementary guidance with the co-producers to look at some guidance specifically for medical students on reflection, and this will be led by the MSc. And the medical students competition is currently focusing on reflection as its theme, and this will hopefully feed into that supplementary guidance. We're looking at some guidance for supervisors and trainers, which would be led by CopMed, so specific supplementary guidance for those. And some advice to address the variation in requirements for different specialties. So this is going to be led by the Academy, and we'll also pick this up through the curricular review, and we're going to raise this as a point within revalidation. And as I said, we're going to create some further learning materials to help support all of this work. And that is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Amir Jaffer from Bevan University Health Board.
Hi.
And it's good to hear that tomorrow we will have the reflective practitioner guide or protocol, which is really great. But my question is about the thorough evaluation that you mentioned for the result. Because the survey, this is not first survey. If I open your website, I can see surveys back to 2013. If you remember. So the thorough evaluation, I need an assurance from you today in front of the conference that it is going to be published and it is going to be acted upon. Thank you very much.
Yes, it will be. So we were clear that there was a benefit from having it done externally, so it is independent. So we have a formal process to develop the tender documentation, which is going through our processes and will be put out, I expect, later this month, and organisations that do research will be able to tender to do that. And we do publish our research, so that would be probably by the middle of next year, and then we'll be working through that to identify what changes, if any, we need to make to the framework.
Any more questions?
Thank you very much.
There's a question at the back. One question.
Hi, my name's Melody Rutherch. I work for the Professional Support Unit for Leona Walsh at the Wales Deanery. And forgive me, Anton, because I know you asked for questions and not statements. I really loved what you said about reflection and the guidance and the toolkit. The bit that I hope we'll see more of in the conference next year is the role of creative reflection and the evidence coming out of the States about the link between creative reflection and building resilience amongst medical students and postgraduate specialty trainees. So, sorry, a bit nervous, but just wanted to raise creative reflection as a theme as well. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. As always, the regulator has been fantastic in attending these events, and as always, we get something new always first at this meetings, and we're very grateful. And we're very grateful for being party to the launch of the new guidance, which comes out tomorrow, and will go a long way to helping us in our own professional development. Right. Moving on swiftly. It is really important that we do something today. Can everybody who's having a birthday please stand up? Ah, brilliant. So our next speaker, Professor Bryn Baxen. It's not my birthday. Every day is my birthday, Inga. Professor Bryn Baxendale is a consultant anaesthetist and the director of the Trent Simulation and Clinical Skills Centre. And I said, what can I say about you? And he said that he comes from Nottingham, that he's an anaesthetist, that he's been involved in simulation training for a long time, that he was involved in the setup of ASPI. And then he said, if you really want to embarrass me, I'll give you something. It's my birthday today, which was an error. So happy birthday, Brent. And we're really looking forward to your talk on celebrating failure, the use of simulation to help understand medical performance and practice.
Well, Anton, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for the invitation to come and talk to you today and contribute to your conference. And it's lovely to meet you. I hope we'll have a chance to meet some of you as the day goes on. I'm recognising that I'm being filmed, so I shall try not to swear, and I'll be as polite as I can. And I'm interested in the juxtaposition of a talk which says celebrating failure after colleagues from the GMC. So I guess I'm just like mentally repositioning some of the context of this talk. But yeah, well, look, thanks very much. I'm going to go through some material here, slightly constrained for time. More than happy to talk to colleagues afterwards about that, but I've got a lot to say. Anyway, this is where I work, Nottingham University Hospitals. I've been there as a consultant since '98. Was in training there for a few years previously. Quite a large institution, positioned in the Midlands across 2 sites, with a reasonable number of staff and a pretty similar array of pressures that I'm sure that many of you are familiar with in terms of how we conduct our work, the pressures that we're under, how we deal with and support staff trying to do the best of their abilities under such pressures. And this talk is a little bit about that. Anton mentioned I'm also director of the Simulation Centre, which is based on the Queen's Medical Centre campus for that institution. It's not all of that building. I wish it was. This is the Postgraduate Education Centre. We're at the back of it. You can't see us. We're hidden away, which is a bit of a problem, actually, about simulation and about how we integrate with trying to improve quality and standards of practice and performance of individuals and teams, because we are slightly hidden in the organisation. So there's something about how we articulate the value that we can bring. We'll see whether I manage to achieve that a bit today. We've been going since 2004. We've got involved with and remain involved with quite a few facets of education, professional development, multi-professional development of teams, and looking at safety systems and systems in practice and human factors. So the true piece around human factors and understanding and improving the conditions in which we work that actually underpins your ability to perform to the best of your abilities each day. And I think that will come out as the talk progresses, I hope. And we've done a lot of work in collaboration with others, and Anton mentioned I've had some involvement at a national level, both with ASPI and with Health Education England around this. So failure, the state or the condition by which we don't quite meet the goals we set out to achieve. And I think this is something which we commonly face. I think it creates some conflict for us, but it is a fact of life. And sometimes that's about active decisions we've made. Sometimes it's about omissions that we have missed. Sometimes it's about actually just not being able to have the resource to meet the demands of what's in front of us. I think failure surrounds us every day. And sometimes we see failure and we sort of find it mildly amusing, especially when it tends to involve others. Some of us have got the ability to reflect and laugh at ourselves a little bit more. I think that's quite important. I tend to do a lot of that myself, about me. Sometimes we recognise that we live in a world which perhaps sets us up to fail. And this is really important when we start to get into healthcare practice, because actually often in our training and in our development as a professional, we don't quite recognise the impact that the system around us is having on our day-to-day performance. It happens in healthcare. And when it happens in healthcare, sometimes it starts to take on a much more serious overtone, depending on the scale of potential harm that has occurred, the scale of the consequences that are involved, the level of attention that is given to that, and the parts that we have played in that as individuals or within our area of service. And I think it's interesting to think about how our response to failure is really, really framed by the outcomes that are associated with it, and also by the lens through which we are looking at it, and whether we look at that as an individual that's been involved as a professional, whether we look at that from the family and patient's perspective, whether we look at it from a professional perspective, a regulatory perspective, wider societal perspective, and all of those will have very valid views and opinions on what has gone on when you're looking back at an outcome of care which has not turned out as we might have expected. And I think that frames a lot of our thinking. So this is one of the key messages, I think. Charles Vincent and René Amalberti, two quite well-established sort of psychologists who look at healthcare quite a lot, have thought through quite carefully how healthcare as an area of work, as an industry, if you like, compares with other types of work in terms of its approach towards safety. And we have this sort of dream of healthcare being high reliability and of being a safety critical industry, which of course it is a safety critical industry. But look at how this compares with other safety critical industries. There's often quite a lot of analogies with aviation and being pilots. I think some of my colleagues quite like the thought of being a pilot. I think that sounds quite romantic. But anyway, so ultra safe industries, far left, civil aviation, nuclear fuel, perhaps railway, so on, are bounded by very, very carefully designed and well thought out procedures and policies and guidelines. They are industries whereby the professionals who work in those environments live and abide by those procedures to the extent that they really don't go to work to take risks. I'm quite encouraged by that. So actually, when I'm on my aeroplane waiting to go on my holiday to Magaluf or something, and actually 315 out of the 316 passengers are on board the plane, we sit and wait. It's a bit frustrating, especially when they switch the air conditioning off. I don't know why they do that, but so you sit and wait. You don't take off and say, well, they'll catch up later. Does that happen in the NHS? Oh, no, it doesn't sound quite like that in the NHS. In the NHS, drawing on that analogy, NHS airlines would already have left, probably with some baggage, and probably with a route map that's being organised on the way. So actually it doesn't work like that, does it, in highly regulated, ultra-safe industries. So healthcare isn't quite like that, but we have a thought that it's an element we could be like that. Other end of the spectrum, deep-sea trawler fishermen go to work each day, and actually they will confront risk. They will potentially confront risk which could be life-threatening or harmful every day. They don't tend to have a rule book that they get out and follow when they're looking at those conditions. They adapt, highly adaptable, and actually count success by virtue of coming back, hopefully coming back unharmed, and hopefully, even more, coming back unharmed and with sufficient fish to go and sell so they can do it again. Very interesting that they learn by success. Learn by success. In the middle, you've got the picture describes sort of firefighting. I think healthcare could live in the middle quite easily, whereby actually, well, we know the work that's got to be done. We're pretty clear about what that's going to look like. The exact nuances of what that's going to look like on any given day or any different shift might vary. So actually, we have to have an ability to adapt and flex our skills and capabilities to meet the demands of what's in front of us. And we know that actually we're doing that in what is essentially quite a complex working environment and quite a resource-constrained environment. So very rarely are we at work with the perfect conditions around us. So actually what we do as professionals and working as professionals within teams is work towards the ability to develop adaptability and to cope. And sometimes, as I'll come on to a bit later, that does mean that we work outside the rules as they are defined in terms of our policies and procedures. But we're making a judgment all of the time. We're making a judgment, hopefully reflecting on it, hopefully feeding that back in such that that policy or procedure could be looked at. Do we do that reliably? Well, you can be the judge of that. I'll come on to it a bit later. Okay. So healthcare sits in the middle, probably spans the whole spectrum. And it's very interesting, actually. We will have colleagues who like to live at this end of the spectrum. Colleagues like to wear their underpants outside their trousers and have a superhero badge. They love that. actually, then it's very difficult if you try and talk to that colleague and say, actually, for this bit of care, you need to follow the rules. Oh, really? No, I don't follow the rules. Similarly, people at the other end who like to have that bounded environment, work to follow rules, really uncomfortable when they're at this end. So we need to recognise that in ourselves and in others. That influences our performance because actually we don't pick and choose the circumstances in which we have to perform our professional work. The other problem is that obviously medical errors, or however you decide to frame that, is becoming increasingly recognised, very visible in the public arena, in the political arena, the professional arena, and has sort of taken on a bit of a public health issue now about the potential harm that we are associated with some areas of care, rather than actually trying to achieve the outcomes we're trying to pursue. So it's a really important, I think, dilemma for us as a profession and as a healthcare system about how we start to address this. Because the attention on patient safety has been going on for a good few years, the improvements have been a bit harder to achieve and to demonstrate reliably. So, learning from failure then, let's think about that in terms of how that sits as an individual, as a life skill, how it sits with us as a professional, and actually the extent to which there is some responsibility at a wider system or organisational level, and what is the interplay between those. What can we contribute to that last facet of learning from failure, learning from day-to-day work? I think there's a number of conflicts in this for us, because, of course, as a life skill, we don't tend to select people into medicine who've experienced much in the way of failure. We do get high achievers. And I'm afraid to say that sometimes coming into medical school or then going into professional development in a specialty where you might encounter failure in exams is a bit of a shock for people, because it might be the first time they've really come up against that. So that's just a backdrop. But we tend to promote people in terms of being successful. So there's a sort of philosophical issue around how we deal with this as a profession. I think we've heard from colleagues at the GMC, and I think, you know, well-described sort of conflicts around the regulatory perspective on performance and when that doesn't quite work out as intended. I won't rehearse those here. Also, I'd say actually let's thinking about that wider system view and about organisational pressures that our healthcare system faces in terms of the political agenda around meeting targets, around the whole concept of never events, which of course are not never events. They will carry on occurring. But how do we actually really probe into that and think, well, how do we deal with that conflict between perfect practice and trying to pursue high quality care versus the constraints under which the system is faced? And so this is a human factors model actually around systems level thinking, which with time won't have much chance to go on, but I'll sort of journey through it because it frames a little bit about how I see simulation offering one route by which we can start to look at this and start to think about how we might address and help support medical colleagues and colleagues working in other professions to address some of these issues. And it starts on the far left in terms of the individual and how we relate to one another and how we are influenced by the work system and the technologies and the equipment and the hardware and the policies and that work environment around us, thinking through about how our processes of care are organised and our interaction with one another and with patients to deliver the work of healthcare, and actually thinking about the outcomes, some of which are fairly proximal and within our sight, some of which the outcomes around patient care and healthcare are rather more distal and away from us, and actually we don't tend to be that well sighted of them. Yet actually those things could be usefully fed back into how we organise our work and develop as professionals. So a human factors model thinking about how we can actually learn in healthcare from what has been done in other industries. I will try and frame this for a bit of simulation, which has got a role within that. I'm not saying simulation is the only answer. I think it's part of the story. So let's think about this in terms of at the individual level. I will touch about a little bit around team working and working in multi-professional teams and finish on just that piece around systems and system safety, which we can do as well. So where to start? The medical model around education and training, this was published in Medical Education a few years ago, was around, well, where does simulation fit into developing individual capability and actually that individual's ability then also perhaps to work effectively within teams. And I think there are some, well laid down experts around expertise developing around how simulation might promote that journey from novice through towards expert, how it might actually pick up technical and non-technical skills. GMC recognises that around professional capabilities, I think. And thinking about, well, actually, where do we really use simulation to rehearse for performance? So it's not actually just an educational tool, rehearsal for performance. So actually really frame it in actually what you are trying to achieve in the workplace and actually trying to replicate that in some way to look at actually how well prepared are we for some things which may be very difficult, may happen infrequently, may have quite high consequence for the patient and the staff and those delivering that care, so that we can actually really responsibly rehearse it. Going back to that Vincent Amalberti diagram, had the fire service in the middle, developing adaptability and actually that capability in teams to adapt to different circumstances. Of course, we're very fortunate that most of the time the fire service aren't working in terms of applying their skills and knowledge. Actually, they spend a fair bit of time training for it. What happens in healthcare? If I ask you about how often we do drills and training in teams to respond to the types of challenge that we have, we don't have that luxury. We're doing the work. So we need to think a little bit more smartly about how do we enhance our ability to reflect, learn, and build that into our practice. Simulation does offer one route. So competency-based model, this is well familiar to you all, around having that threshold by which individuals might meet a certain level of skill, beyond which they can start to work perhaps with more distant supervision or in an area of practice. The simulation piece, obviously a spectrum of techniques and everything, sits along that fairly easily, and I think you can shuffle some of those around quite easily. This is just purely illustrative to say that actually from an individual learning their trade, learning particular tasks and procedures through to putting them into practice, there are different ways by which simulation and approaches to simulation can support that individual, and some of those can be delivered out of or away from the workplace. Some of them can be delivered within the workplace and close to the point of care as a reminder. And actually, I think with well thought out and integrated use of simulation, I think we can actually help individuals perhaps move along that curve and understand where they are perhaps struggling in some areas of professional development, which will be different from people. We can't put people through sort of like a factory sausage machine. Everyone's the same. Each individual's different, and we need to think about how do we focus people and signpost them to the resources they might need for their development based on the experiences and the work that they are likely to be doing or that they are going to be taking on as they gain progression through the training grades and into consultant practice. And even in consultant practice, how do we think about how we develop new skills? How do we adopt and use new technologies? And there's potentially a role for simulation in that as well. So the next piece is actually, well then, reaching competence is okay, but actually what you then realise is that actually displaying and demonstrating those skills in different contexts can place you under different levels of challenge. So actually there's something about, should we really be targeting excellence from an early stage rather than competence? And actually different approaches and different methodologies coming into the simulation and literature now about how do we enhance the progression of individuals along that learning curve. Some of the craft specialties, surgery in particular, looking at the concept of boot camps, so taking trainees at an early stage and really letting them rehearse and orientate into a new area of practice or a new area of training to develop a level of capability in a simulated context which really positions them well to learn more effectively and more quickly in the clinical environment under guided supervision. Concepts from the psychology literature around development of expertise and thinking about mastery learning and deliberate practice, about that feedback, that focusing in on tasks and practice in a very, very focused way by experienced supervisors to guide individuals about areas in which they're still struggling that they might need a bit of support. So concepts that actually really start to refine our role as trainers to support trainees and develop the skill sets and the capabilities that they are seeking in order to progress in their area of professional practice. So all of this, of course, needs really well-designed simulation exercises or interventions, and they need to be integrated into that learning pathway for whichever trainee or for us as colleagues in a very focused way, we need to think about the psychological safety of the learner. And it's interesting, this overlaps with some of the presentation before here, because I think there are some very strong links to be made about what we are seeking to see in practice versus actually where simulation can really help focus and develop those capabilities and link into then what should be happening in the clinical environment and thinking about educational capabilities of the faculty. And actually the capabilities of the faculty that we see in the simulation environment are very much transferable to day-to-day practice in terms of how we observe performance, how we give feedback and help debrief and help individuals reflect. So we'll come on to that. So that piece is critical. If I said these are some of the principles by which we will really help promote the opportunities for learning in simulation, I'm just using a broad term, around psychological safety of the learner, a lot of that really translates to what we're seeking in day-to-day practice. So actually the conditions are the same. We're talking the same language. I'm suggesting simulation is a very good approach and tool by which actually we can develop this approach and we can make sure it aligns with the conditions that we want in clinical practice. Encouraging reflective practice and thinking about the role of feedback and the skills of debriefing that would really support that as a trainer, as a supervisor, and actually different styles of debriefing to suit the circumstances, whether it's in the moment or whether it's post-event, reflecting back on an episode of care or a day at work or over a period of development for the individual. Putting that, that's the bit of adult learning, by the way, COLB, experiential learning cycle. Just tick that one off. So a little bit about how simulation really fits into that model of experiential learning and about having the opportunity in a safe environment, if we design it correctly, to stretch and probe and challenge individuals in terms of areas where they feel slightly more vulnerable or where they're a bit concerned or where they're taking on extra responsibilities, which might not just be about particular procedural things in day-to-day practice, and what that would actually look like if they then encounter something similar the following day in a work environment. So the debriefing piece then, I think, is a critical component of what we've learned in the simulation community that actually really enables individual learners and us as trainers to achieve that goal of promoting really effective reflection. Really effective reflection and the ability to share that with colleagues, which is interesting, to talk about this in front of their peers in a safe way, and for us not to be judgmental, but to really be interested in what it is that's actually helped make sense of what we've seen in a simulated environment. So something about actually watching, observing actions and behaviours, and then really thinking through, well, okay, that's interesting, I wouldn't have done it like that. But actually, that's not what I'd say. You think, well, actually, I'm really interested in exploring what it was that influenced you to do what you did, or perhaps not do what I was expecting you to do. And really to explore that and to help individuals take that step back and think that through and be honest about what it was that was thinking it. And yes, it might be a lack of knowledge. It might be unfamiliarity with a particular skill. Often it's about actually how people are taking in information and processing it and what they've taken in, what they've prioritised in all of that noise coming in, and actually what has then happened. And sometimes if we're videoing it, you can play some of these pieces back to them and they think, oh, I didn't know I did that. I had no idea. So, not just commenting on the actions that we see, but this calls it under frames, Jenny Rudolph's work, actually looking at what is it that's influencing the actions that I saw. So actually, if the comment is about, this is what I saw you do, that's not me making a judgment, that's me saying, look, this is what we saw happen. What was it that led you to do that? And actually, that could be about positive practice as well as about gaps or errors or a dropped opportunity for dealing with something. Really, really important concept. And there are various models around debriefing that can encompass and help us develop that ability for feedback. This is one, there are others, that's just an example. But actually it enables us then to have that conversation which might lead on to some teaching, be an instructor, might lead us into just facilitate a conversation to explore that a bit deeper and encourage the learner to go away and really think and look up resources that might help frame, might help influence the next time when they're approached by similar circumstances. I don't want to develop people as individual professional colleagues who follow things by rote. I want them to understand how they might need to adapt and actually to have that metacognition piece about being able to adapt in the moment and in conjunction with their colleagues, and to share their thinking with colleagues in the moment. So, not just technical skills, something here, really big piece around non-technical skills, around the social and cognitive skills that we carry around with us every day, that we develop in our professional practice, that really underpin how we work effectively with other colleagues, how we help lead or follow in the moment, how we share and delegate tasks and make priorities for the care that or the episode of care we're about to be involved in, how we process information. And processing information is really interesting, actually. I tend to see, the medical students might be here, they might tell me this is in the curriculum now. I don't know. If you're taught about actually how you think and about how you make decisions and critical decisions under pressure, I think this is a really interesting area. It's a piece that we're looking at in more depth. But that piece is saying, well, actually, situational awareness, the fact that actually we are not perfect as humans. Actually, just because we become doctors doesn't make us perfect, I'm afraid. We've still got issues that we need to face up to. This all builds into actually how we support the development of professional capabilities into professional behaviour, and how we promote a more appropriate or a more informed, shall I say, professional culture of the work that we do and what we're trying to achieve. GMC, that's good, isn't it? Good medical practice sort of frames it in slightly different language, but actually this is what we're talking about. And actually simulation really offers us a great approach to help develop and enhance these capabilities alongside the development that is happening in the clinical environment through experience and hopefully appropriate supervision. Right, so it's not just about gaps in performance though, it's also about this piece around great saves. It's about actually how do we recognise, how do we help individuals recognise their abilities that they are developing to be much more hazard aware about circumstances in which they might be quite prone to making a mistake, or they might miss some critical bit of information, make a decision which actually needs to be reviewed very quickly, but they don't put that safety net in place. How do we really promote that piece around error recovery? Because I will say now, you are never going to achieve a point whereby we make no errors. Fact. I'll prove it to you in a minute. Actually, we need to look much more carefully about how do we have set the conditions around professional practice, working with colleagues, working under well-designed conditions, that we can recover from errors when they are made at a very early stage. We can try and design some out. We won't design them all out. We need to be able to capture it. We need to be able to mitigate against the potential consequences of those errors when they're happening. Right, so this is the first bit. What do we know about humans? Human performance is variable. So actually, with training, you can move your optimal performance, if the pointer's going to work, you can move your optimal performance up that curve to a level actually where you can reach a higher level of performance with appropriate training. Obviously, that's me, okay, because I'm superior to most people. You know, the problem is what happens when you're working with someone that isn't quite at that level. Oh, we all have days where we might be working with colleagues where we think, oh, it's going to be a bit difficult today because actually I don't think they're quite as good as me and I'm going to have to work a bit harder. So actually that can be a bit uncomfortable, can't it? Actually, and that then frames your whole day at work. I will guarantee you, it will frame your whole day at work. The problem is that that person there, someone weaker than me, is me on a different day. It's me when the dogs run off in the morning, I'm late for work, I can't find anywhere to park, and then I'm an anaesthetist, I have the pleasure of working with surgical colleagues, and then I come in and then I discover that actually the patients I've been to see on the list isn't quite the list that I'm doing. And by some telepathic means, I was meant to have worked that out. So actually, I go into theatre, and actually my anaesthetic practitioner, ODP, is immediately knowing that I will need double-strength coffee because I need to de-stress a little bit. But actually, that's affecting my performance straight away. If we work with colleagues and there's an argument or there's someone rude, we know that will influence performance of the people around them. And that is something, it's a gift that keeps giving. Because actually, if you have a really big argument with somebody, the next time you work with them, you're already making that slightly more, oh, I wonder what today's going to be like, treading on eggshells moment. And actually, we will work with colleagues who just blast on, you know, underpants outside the trousers. That's the way to go. My way or no way. So there's a bit about that limitations in performance. And actually fatigue, really important. Workload, really important. Lots of factors can influence this. We work with people who come to work when actually perhaps they're not 100% in terms of health. That affects that. Do we declare that? Do we share that with colleagues? Probably not. So there's all of this going on. So very difficult to be judgmental, think through conditions. All right, here's the next bit. All I want you to do is count the letter F. The number of times you can see the letter F on that. I'll give you a few seconds. You're quite an educated audience. I'm confident. Okay, right, stop. Who can see 3? Put your hands up. Oh, a few people can see 3. Who can see 4? Oh, who can see 5? Oh, who can see 6? Can anyone see more than 6? Truly gifted? No. Right, so here's a problem. You're an intelligent crowd. You're in pretty much optimal conditions. You're not multitasking. Oh, you might be on your phones. I don't know. And actually, across the room, 3, 4, 5, 6 Fs. Well, that's a bit perplexing, isn't it? Because you're all looking at the same information. So there's a problem as a human. Our brains are a little bit tricky, and we overlook that. So our brains are filling in gaps all of the time, and we don't look at all the information. We don't take it in a way that we assume others are seeing it. We fill in the gaps, and we move on. So your brains can't really process all of the information that's coming in. So I can show you many more examples of this, but actually this is really tricky. That's quite fun, isn't it? But actually, if that takes place in a clinical environment when you're reading a prescription chart on a dose, and you are reading what you expect to see, not what is written down, that could be really tricky. Really tricky, and there are many other examples about that. How do we counteract it? Well, we say actually we'll counteract that by working effectively in teams. And there's good evidence about team training and team training models. This is the Team Steps one. It's one we use in Nottingham around NUH teams. And about looking at leadership and situational monitoring, that developing shared mental models across groups of staff working together rather than what's individually in your head. Mutual support, the way in which we will be able to challenge one another, check in with one another, support one another in any moment. And effective communication skills. I refuse to believe there are very many serious incident reports or never event reports that do not comment on could have more effective team working and better communication, because it's such a prevalent issue. The Team Steps things talks about some of the barriers that get in the way of team working. I'm not going to dwell on this. Lots of tools in there which are skills and behaviours that support effective team working, and actually they can be learned. We have to get past the potential ignorance, arrogance about some of these looking quite simple to say, actually, how do we make sure these are done each time and every time when it's appropriate? How do we support colleagues, more junior colleagues, other staff, using some of these tools when I'm leading a ward round, running a theatre team, going down to ED? These are the skill sets that actually will support and counteract some of our individual limitations if we actually acknowledge them and spend time developing them. Then there's a bit about the world in which we work, which is what I'm going to finish on, because actually we can use in situ simulation really, really effectively, workplace-based simulation exercises, not just to look at individual performance and team-based performance in the work environment, but also to look at latent threats and the way in which the work environment either supports or hinders optimal practice, optimal performance from you. And actually, this is some work that we're developing more and more in Nottingham and other centres too, I'm sure, about really understanding more about the way in which the system is designed and set up to support our work, you will know. Count the letter F, pick out the wrong drug. Well, the pharmaceutical companies aren't designing their boxes for us. The way in which they're stored, very, very easy just to pick out the wrong drug. This is something about medical equipment and technology. So interestingly, if you have a look at the keypads, these will be the sort of devices often manufactured by the same manufacturer. The keypads are laid out in different ways. Even the banks have got the keypads on your cash point machines designed in the same way. So actually, you go up to a cash point now, you're just plugging it in automatically. If I got you to do that on a different keyboard, you'd probably you'd probably try and draw out £40,000. And the person behind you would be thinking, oh, hello, yeah, that's, I'll stick with him. That's right. So there's a bit about that. There's a bit about the ways in which we bend the rules at work all the time. I said earlier about the fact we live in a complex and constrained environment. There are policies and protocols written often. I'm afraid they're written by a concept around work as imagined. They're written in offices by people, often very well-meaning, to say this is how we think you should do this piece of work. They're not necessarily co-designed with people doing the work, and they're probably not tested out in the work environment. We've done some of this testing out to look at policies and protocols and redesigned how they're constructed, how they're presented to people to help performance, rather than to be there in the background, which suddenly come out when something hasn't turned out quite as well as we anticipated. Well, you didn't follow the policy. Well, no, I didn't, because actually none of us follow the policy. Most of the time it's fine. Oh, no, that's not how it's then discussed, different terms. So we bend the rules all the time. We bend the rules all the time. There are many reasons for that. And it's about the messiness of clinical work, and it's about work as done rather than work as imagined. This goes into now resilience. I'm finishing now, don't worry. Right, I'm going out live. Right, this is actually, yeah, that's when someone was leaving, bottom left. So we had a picnic, and actually we had a picnic just next to the sign that above says absolutely no food to be used in this area. Well, there we are. So that's life, isn't it? This is what we do. No drinks to be left here. Well, that couldn't be clearer, could it? But actually, we bend the rules. This is the messiness of the world we live in. So I'm not saying that's right. You can play that out in many different ways. Resilience, you mentioned resilience. This is a bit then about actually slight anxiety in the perhaps the psychology and the sort of human factors world about the focus of attention on individual resilience, because actually safety critical industries position resilience very much at an organisational level, not with individual. Organisational resilience is about designing and testing and improving the way in which a system or an environment or an area of work is designed to support the individual trying to do the right thing the first time at the right time. It does not rest on the shoulders of the individual. So I'll appreciate there's a slightly different take on resilience about actually how we promote individuals' ability to reflect and to respond to events. I'm not dismissing that at all, I think, but actually if you speak to the safety critical industries, they say actually this is an organisational responsibility. I'm not looking at you deliberately, sorry. But, I think it is. And I think we're recognising that now more and more. So how you manage to cope with that turbulence, how you build up individual to a more collective mindfulness, how we have a responsibility as a medical profession to feed that back into and support the organisations or the services in which we work to really learn and really create conditions by which actually we can support effective practice. So my closing point is that I think simulation has got a lot to offer. I think I'm proposing the importance of taking more of a systems view on this, alongside the attention we've historically given to team-based or perhaps certainly individual-based development and professional capabilities. I think simulation has got a whole area of ways in which it can influence and improve the healthcare system, way beyond some of the things that I've touched on, whether it goes through selection or goes through other things. You can come back and have a look at that. But I think this is a bit about actually how we think translation of curricula and training through into individual capabilities, team-based performance, leadership in practice and organisational learning. I think simulation spans that. I think it offers us great opportunities if we design it effectively. Thank you. For sure, yeah, as long as they're not too tricky. No.
Any questions?
People probably want coffee.
There is a question.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for a great talk. I'm sort of interested in things like the learning curve on procedural base or things that can be made procedural-ish. You defined a learning curve there, which, from my understanding in the literature, is very much a failure-based model. You have a steep learning curve in the initial phases, and then you plateau out. There is the sigmoid learning curve as well, which tends to describe a success-based model too. Do you find that it is more of a sort of an exponential with failure? I'm finding that people learn more in the early phases with success, so they take a longer time to learn, and then perhaps they learn better from their failures in the sort of the more expert period. Is that something you found yourself, or you find that you're modifying the learning curve with these well-judged, well-timed simulator sessions?
Yeah, I think it's probably more the latter. I think we probably are modifying it. I think that actually, I think if I'm honest, I suspect that actually the community trying to support effective simulation-based learning are probably not challenging the literature and probably not really looking at it in an academic perspective as much as we could achieve. I think we could understand an awful lot more. I suspect it varies according to the attribute we're trying to develop in individuals. I think it might be influenced by the individuals and their approach to learning. I think it is influenced by the nature of the feedback that they're given and whether we are really able to focus in on very detailed aspects of what might be a complex task when you break it down rather than actually an outcome. So actually achieving it is interesting. Tim Draycott, who's done a lot of work in obstetrics gynecology, has done some work looking at taking a group of trainees, surgical trainees, through a fairly heavy predicated simulation-based learning platform, haptics, around some surgical capabilities versus a group who just developed along the traditional way. What he then discovered was that those individuals who'd been through the more intensive preparation were receiving more supervision in practice in the operating theatre than the other group, more supervised practice. He thought that was a bit contradictory, he didn't quite expect it, and when he then went to talk to the individuals concerned, it was because what he discovered was that the trainers with the more traditional prepared group were letting those trainees get to a certain point, it became complex, the trainer then took over, saying, actually, look, I'll do this bit, I'll let you do the next one. Whereas the people who'd gone through more intensive preparation to get to that stage and thought through that tricky bit, he discovered the supervisors, the trainers, were letting them go through that, but supervising them rather than taking the instruments out of their hands. So I think you're right. I think there is a lot of learning to do about that whole development of capability. What the curve looks like, I don't know.
Questions? Oh, I think you're getting off mic. That's right. This one?
Oh, nearly.
I'm not sure that all of these learning curves are correct. The brilliant biochemist St. Georgi published knowledge against research time in the 40s, and there were gaps, areas where he went backwards. Maybe an orthopedic surgeon taught that some knee procedures are wonderful. Recent publication, BMJ, they know good, you're going back. So they're all rather smooth. And Cold's Learning Circle should have some arrows going in the wrong direction if it wants to have real life. But may I ask you, have you considered doing any simulation work on real life problems? Because the last slide you put up systems, and the individual was at the bottom. But a real life picture, which is very common, is a registrar who does 13 hours work every day for 4 days, during the day, hands over, then has to travel to and from work, maybe over a long distance, because the deaneries move them around from one place far distant from another. And fatigue was put on your slide as very important. And I just feel, old, just retired doc as I am, that we should really try to be doing something about these things.
I would wholeheartedly agree. I think the tragedy, I would suggest, is that a lot of that evidence already exists. It exists outside healthcare, and we're no different. So actually, I don't think that that's something that I would need to research. I think that's something we would need to look at in terms of how do you design the way in which training programs are offered and work is conducted to recognise those factors that will actually limit the ability of the individual to perform to the best of their abilities, and also perhaps also influence their well-being about actually that journey home. That journey home, if in fact they've been involved in something which really didn't go well on their 4th night, and now they've got to travel for an hour. And actually, what do we have in the way the system is designed to support that individual? Because actually we know that that individual is at high risk. And if that recurs, that curve about limitations of performance quite easily feeds into becoming stressed and actually seriously unwell. So,
I just want to say thank you again to all our speakers. That was a brilliant first session for the morning. If I'm correct, we are going to take a break for refreshments. I don't want to cut down on the time for refreshments, so I think, is it 11 o'clock? So I think we'll take a good half hour and come back here at 11:30. I have been asked to remind you to please vote for your favourite poster. In the back there are voting slips within your packs, and we'll see you back here at 11:30. Thank you. Right, folks, if you can make your way to your seats. I have been asked to mention we do realize that the temperature seems to be fluctuating wildly up and down. We're going to try and find the golden middle ground. We are aware of it, and we will try and sort that out. I was going to say I can't find David, but I think I've just found him. There you are. You're hiding in the back. Today's theme has been innovation in healthcare education, and I think so far the program's delivered quite well on that topic. These days have always been about challenge and about challenging the way we look at ourselves, our training and what we do day to day, trying to push the boundaries of what we know about medicine and medical education. And it gives me great pleasure. You're going to have to come up here at some point, David. You can't hide there the whole time. It gives me great pleasure to introduce, I was going to say an old friend, but you're a youngster, to introduce Dr. David Loughran. We've known each other for a while. David is a surgeon by trade, has been a Welsh Clinical Leadership Fellow, has a deep interest in the future, artificial intelligence, etc., and is going to talk to us about clinical artificial intelligence. Where are we, and where are we going, and what do we need to know? David has a vast experience in clinical AI and is currently working with Babylon Health. David, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anton. Good morning. Everyone had coffee? Good. Okay, so I'm going to talk about where is technology taking us and what does it mean for us. Now, the first thing I want to say is that this is a good news story. Okay, I'm not going to come here and tell you that you're all going to lose your jobs and just go home and forget all about it. I hope to convince you that AI will soon allow us to do more of what we are uniquely able to do. It will not take our jobs, but it may bring challenges as our jobs change. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the broader technology advances that actually mean that changes in training must happen, and possibly at a speed that we're not that used to. But the training can become more efficient and relevant without a complete revolution. And it may make us guides of knowledge rather than the holders of knowledge, both for patients and students and trainees. So, as Anton mentioned, I was a surgical trainee here in Wales and did the Welsh Deanery Clinical Leadership Fellowship. I'm now an AI clinician at Babylon Health in London. So, an AI clinician, probably a new term to most of you. Essentially, what that means is that I work with data scientists, developers, engineers, building triage, diagnostic engines, predictive analytics models. And as some context, Babylon Health now has a few million members globally. Some of you may have heard of the NHS GP at Hand product in London, which is powered by us. And I think of particular interest to this talk, we now have a team of digital health and AI clinical fellows, which I'll talk about. A bit closer to home, I'm also a clinical lead for shared decision-making and patient-centred care at Public Health Wales. So essentially what I'm going to cover is a little bit about what's happening in medical education from a technology perspective and speak about the TOEFL review. I'm going to spend 5 minutes just demystifying AI so that actually when you leave this room, each of you will kind of know what some of those terms mean and be able to cut through the hype and understand where it's actually going. So what the likely impact of AI is in healthcare over the next decade, and then move on to what does a digital health curriculum look like and how I think we should move with that in Wales. So out of interest, the TOEFL review, who here has heard of the TOPL review? Mark, and no one else. Okay, interesting. So the TOPL review is a big piece of work by Health Education England, looking at what does technology mean for health education in the next 15, 20 years or so. Eric Topol is an eminent cardiologist from the States, sort of ran the Cleveland Clinic for a number of years, and he's been tasked by Health Education England to bring together a group of specialists to discuss, think about where technology will take us in the next 20 years. So here's a little clip of Eric Topol himself just describing that first part of the process.
No one's ever done something like this. That is, taking this new set of tools that are unquestionably having a dramatic effect on healthcare's future, and to bring all the disciplines together, all the experts, and start to plan how to use these effectively. And what can we do to really benefit patients with all these newfound capabilities? The fact that you can get a warning on your wrist through your watch that your heart rhythm isn't right, or you could get your potassium in your blood through your watch. These are some things that we wouldn't have anticipated. So the fact that you can get your genome sequence, that you can get your gut microbiome sequence, there's so many ways to understand each human being like never before. What it means is we can get remarkably more productive, that we don't do mass screenings, but we know who should be watched for whatever particular condition, that in the future we could prevent things like asthma attacks and seizures and heart attacks and strokes, and far better management of things like diabetes and high blood pressure. So there's all sorts of opportunities of improving our workflow and patient management. Reading scans, slides, looking at skin lesions. These are all patterns that are better for machines to process at high throughput accurately, and then have human clinical oversight. And that's where this is landing. This is a combination of doing the things best that machines do, but also that clinicians can do. There isn't any question that over time, and we're talking not just immediately, but in the 5 to 10 year time frame, we're going to see some immense productivity improvements. So for example, if somebody was instead of going into a regular hospital, they could go home and be on sensors and be continuously monitored with artificial intelligent algorithms. That's just one example of how we're going to see changes. And when that happens, think of all the different people that are affected. For example, we're going to need more data scientists, of which there are relatively few, and we'll have the types of specialties which are going to be very much supported through machine learning and AI. We may have less. And if we ever get the remote monitoring together, we may have less hospital personnel. So we're going to see dynamic changes across the board over the years ahead. But there will be new areas that will grow, just as there are areas that will see some reductions. So this is something that's bigger than the NHS. It really will be transformative. That eventually, just a matter of time, that the patient will be truly the center. And clinicians will be rescued from the despair of not being able to care for patients well, because they're so burdened with so much keyboards and administrative and all these other things that divert them from what they really want to do, why they went into healthcare and medicine in the first place. And then we obviously want to see the productivity in these health systems. So each of these areas will eventually be revolutionized over time. Maybe it'll take 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and we'll look back now in 2018 as this thing rolled out, is that we were able to really nail it of what is the biggest advantage of bringing all these tools together.
So the TOPL review has brought back their initial report. The final report will come later this year. But essentially, they're going to focus on 3 areas where they think the biggest changes will come in medical education powered by technology over the next 20 years. So genomics is going to be huge. So we'll have all heard about the move in England to allow all cancer patients to have their genome sequenced before the end of this year. I'm just concerned that we're missing that boat in Wales. I'm not hearing a huge amount in Wales about genomics. I hear a lot over the border. The second theme is around digital medicine and immersive education. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about that because Mark will speak far more eloquently than I about that next. And then the last theme is around AI and robotics. I think AI will make big strides, especially in, again, that sort of admin part of it. Hopefully won't, we hear a lot of hype around AI. I don't think that's going to be realized, but I think it will solve some really useful problems. Robotics, we're not talking about Da Vinci robots. We're talking about autonomous robotics. I think the jury is still out on really how much difference that will make in the next 20 years. I think the 20 years after is probably where that will really make a big difference. So in 5 minutes, I'm just going to go through some common types of AI and some terminology. This isn't going to teach you about AI, but it might just give you enough confidence to ask the right questions and start differentiating hype from reality. So you can't really see this picture. So the first one is expert systems. So expert systems have been around for decades. They're essentially complex decision trees. They're if-then logic trees. This picture essentially is a load of nodes connected by transition logic, and it's basically a big human sort of pathway, done on a bigger scale, slightly more complicated, and run automatically rather than by a human. Whether this is AI by what we would tend to think about it is debatable, but the majority of AI in healthcare today are these, so they are complex decision trees. So the next element are around Bayesian networks, and hopefully some of you will have heard at least of Bayesian networks, and essentially these are probabilistic graphs, so they're things that are connected and have probabilities assigned to them. Again, most of these links are curated by humans, but they can be explored in different ways. So essentially they are a probabilistic map of a thing, which you can then explore in different ways. So this is an example, one of our examples around probabilities of diseases and their links to symptoms and disease links, etc. And the next slide is an example from our work of how that may be used as a sort of a Google Plus, a medical Google.
I've got quite a sore stomach.
Sorry to hear that. Let's figure out what's causing your pain and how to treat it. Chris, where exactly is the pain?
It's kind of on the top part of my stomach, sort of in the middle.
And how bad is the pain?
Oh, it's not too bad.
And does it come and go?
Yeah, it comes and goes, and it's worse after eating.
I see. How would you describe the pain?
Sort of feels like a burning pain.
Okay. And are you feeling sick?
Yeah, a little bit.
Have you vomited at all?
No.
Have you noticed you're feeling fuller sooner than usual?
No.
How long have you had this pain?
A few months, 3 months maybe.
Are you still a non-smoker?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Have you been taking any of your ibuprofen tablets the last few days?
Yeah, I have.
Thanks, Chris. I know enough now to offer information on what may be causing your symptoms.
So essentially Bayesian networks allow us to explore that kind of map. We'll come a little bit in a little bit how this can do reasonably well at things it knows, but does very badly at things it doesn't know. The next type is around neural networks. So essentially a neural network is where it's given an input and it's given an output by a human, and then the machine works out what's the middle. So it's not told by a human why it should be given a certain output. it tries to work out that pattern itself. So the recent DeepMind ophthalmology paper around OCTs is an example of neural nets. And neural nets are quite interesting in healthcare because it brings up the question of explicability or explainability. So sometimes you can get a feel for why a neural net might have come to an answer, but you can never fully answer it. So it's kind of this black box. There is some discomfort in healthcare around black boxes, and whether we're comfortable not knowing exactly why a machine makes a decision. But I would throw that challenge back and say, as clinicians, we are kind of black boxes. We can sometimes justify our decisions in hindsight, but they probably don't really replicate our initial decision-making. And lastly, around natural language processing. And there's lots of different parts to natural language processing. For me, it's really interesting because essentially it's desperately trying to do what humans do so well. So as humans, we are incredibly good at speech recognition, understanding parts of speech, the intent that we have from that speech. We're getting there slowly, but we're still a long way away from human ability in NLP. And as far as dampening the hype, so we talk about narrow AI and generalizable AI. So narrow AI is essentially, it's trained to do a specific task, often takes a huge amount of work to get to that point where it can do that task reasonably well, but it has no concept of how to do anything else. So there are no transferable skills. And that's essentially all the current uses of AI in healthcare. Generalizable AI, it's being trained to use one task and transferring some of that skill to another task. So imagine a surgeon who's trained in open surgery. That surgeon can transfer some of their knowledge to laparoscopic surgery. Some things they will need to learn, but some of the skills are transferred. Here, there are no real examples. We're a long way off. This is killer robot territory. We're not there, thankfully. So where do I think AI will take us in the next decade? So I think one of the big areas is around normal versus abnormal. And there's a huge amount of money going into image recognition. It's teed up for this because there's a huge amount of data out there. So a huge amount of imaging data. We haven't really captured a way to use it all yet, but that will come soon so that we have vast amounts of images that we can explore. And we can give it two outcomes. So if you think about that neural net, we can say normal, abnormal. We're not talking about 20 different diagnoses and the complexity of that. We're saying there are two outcomes here. Perfect for a neural net to do. We look at radiology, so we have some good papers around chest x-rays as far as saying abnormal or normal. CTs and MRs, we're not there yet. But essentially, this allows prioritization of work, and I think that will be the first theme of what AI can do in the next decade. You heard Topol speak about some monitoring, so both in the home and hospital. So, it's extending that hospital monitoring to your home. We're used to this Internet of Things idea at home as far as our appliances. We'll see much more of that in healthcare. As far as home monitoring, COPD, diabetes being some key examples. And there was an example around e-observations from a Google paper earlier this year, which essentially said to a neural net, work out which of these patients are going to deteriorate, which of these patients are going to die in hospital, which of these patients are going to have a long length of stay, and told it nothing else. So simply said, here are the variables of that patient when they arrived, and here's what happened to them. Gave it 46 billion data points and said, work it out. Didn't tell it that actually heart rate, that's an important thing, or blood pressure, take note of that. It said, work it out. Complete flexibility. And very interestingly, it decided on about 40 variables, which said, if I know these 40 variables, I can do a new score far, far better than any of you are doing, and I can do it in real time. So that's a sort of monitoring that has been proved to work. It needs to go through lots of regulatory hoops to actually be used in day-to-day clinical practice, but the next decade is plenty of time for that to happen. And lastly, and it's the one that I think we will all be grateful to hear, is that we should be able to reduce the admin workload of our frontline with AI. So automated note-keeping, especially in primary care and outpatients, is a much easier scenario to do some of that language processing. And just imagine voice commands. So we haven't got any, have we got any F1s, F2s in the room? Maybe. We've got a couple of medical students. Imagine them being able to say, Alexa, order an FBC, a U&E, a chest x-ray, Mrs. Jones in bed 12, on this ward, please, and actually tell me when they're done. Suddenly that takes 10 seconds instead of 10 minutes of admin. And that's not that far away from what we can imagine. We do that at home. Crucially, this allows us to spend more of our time doing the things that we can uniquely do. So here's an example of actually what our primary care solution in Babylon looks like from later on this year. So this can be a virtual consultation or real life. For Babylon, it's virtual. But it's listening, it's transcribing, it's working out which voice is doctor voice, which voice is patient voice. It's transcribing that. It's taking clinical codes from what it's hearing and being confirmed, both as far as pertinent, sort of positives and negatives. It's documenting, it does things like suggesting questions because, that doctor might be tired, fatigued, they're not quite on the ball. And then it makes a summarized consultation note. Now, this isn't going to be perfect all the time, but what it does mean is that instead of that 5-10 minutes of documenting, a doctor can now look at it and just change things if they need to. So that 5-minute task of writing becomes a 1 or 2 minute task of checking and amending. That's going live later this year for our Babylon GPs. So I think this next part is really interesting for this audience. So what does a digital health curriculum look like? So at Babylon, we developed a digital health and clinical AI fellowship. We now have 12 fellows in the UK and a further 10 in Malaysia. And essentially, this is a year away from clinical practice. So our curriculum is definitely skewed towards what we do, and that's understandable. That's the sort of expertise that we have in-house. But essentially, we go through some basics of AI. This isn't a deep dive into AI, but it's enough to be able to understand what are the opportunities and, crucially, what are the challenges for AI, and enable them to be able to converse with data scientists to solve problems. We go through some data science. In reality, data science is just statistics by a different name. It's a slightly sexier name that the data science world have decided to go with. Focusing on assessing algorithms, how we use structured data, ontologies. So some of you will have heard of things like SNOMED CT. How do we take SNOMED CT from an administrator's tool to actually being useful clinically? We teach them some basic Python coding skills. We teach them how to look at data visualization for users. So how do we take this world of big data and predictive analytics and say, actually, most people can't deal with that much data. How do we show them what they need to know to be able to make the right decision for that moment in time? We try and make it very patient-centered, so bring user research right into that curriculum. So understand how users use devices, and there are lots and lots and lots of devices coming into that digital health sphere that our patients, our users are using. Most of them are scared to discuss them in our clinical consultations because they know we're not comfortable with them. And regulation, so how do we bring a device to market safely, and how do we sort of try and do some horizon scanning around what's coming next? So how does a regulator deal with autonomous algorithms and AI, things that are changing every day? So you can't do a clinical trial and say, here it is, those are the results, it's safe. You go, actually, this is now learning day by day, and the results are changing day by day. How does a regulator tackle that? And we're just starting in our sort of second cohort to think about the basics of genomics and their potential uses. You'll be pleased to hear that we still have a journal club, but sometimes it's in VR instead. So my wishes for medical education in Wales. So I haven't spoken to anyone about this, but I hope that HEIW is well-timed and has a remit to try and do things differently. We always hear about Wales being the right size to do things differently. there's a moment in time here where there's a lot of things coming onto the market, a lot of changes coming. Can HEIW capitalise on that? The other thing I think we need to start thinking about in both undergraduate and postgraduate curriculums is how do we train clinicians to be comfortable as the translators of data for our patients and not the holders of data. So gone are the days where a consultant will just know everything and know everything that there is to know. There's too much data coming through for that to be the case. What a consultant can have is a huge amount of experience of how they use that data. So that's wisdom and not knowledge. How do we train the next generation to be comfortable with that? And equally, using the same kind of principles, how do trainers and supervisors start the journey to understand how their role changes because of that? So they will have trainees who come through who are hugely, hugely digitally literate, understand predictive analytics, probably better than they will, but again, lack that experience to understand how they apply that. So how do we change that balance and understand that actually both parties still have a role? And as patients and users become empowered with digital health tools, how do we get students and clinicians to be really comfortable with those tools, be able to discuss them openly and use them? So, patients will start coming in and saying, oh, ignore that, heart rate score on their news chart. That's me. I know that because I check my heart rate on my Apple Watch every 10 minutes. How do we get students comfortable with patients or users who have actually just bought a continuous glucose monitor and know how to do that and probably know their diabetes immensely better than their diabetic consultant because they're seeing data points every few hours, minutes, whatever it is? How do we get our students to start thinking about the future? Do we give each student their gene profile so that actually when they're in their bedroom in the evening, they can start thinking about, how do I use gene profiling? There's a huge amount of data there that will be used, but I'm not sure we're quite there yet as far as thinking, who's going to drive that? Who's going to think about those applications? And I think there's a huge amount that will come from immersive technologies. So we've already heard about simulation and sort of VR with haptics and augmented reality are sort of a next step of that. And Mark will, I'm sure, discuss a bit more about that. But really, that's about accelerating training. So in summary, this is a good news story. Okay? This is not losing jobs, people taking jobs, not knowing what we're doing in the next generation. This is about releasing us to do the things that we can uniquely do. The next 10 years will allow some prioritization of tasks, early intervention for deterioration, and reduced admin workloads. I think those are the big themes for AI. Further, data analytics and digital health consumerism will make us guides, not holders of knowledge, both to patients and students. We need to think about how that works in practice. Thank you very much.
So don't run away. David, I just wanted to say thank you very much for that talk and putting it in a language that even I could understand. I'm sure there is going to be questions. There are going to be many questions. Mark was first, Emma was second. And with this conversation will continue afterwards, I am sure. Do we have a microphone, Karis, over there?
Fantastic talk. Thank you very much, Daf. Really fascinating topic. First off, when you go off, can I have your roaming microphone? That'd be really good. Just gives me a bit of freedom. Second off, when it comes to ethics, are there AI ethics panels yet? So I'm thinking about algorithms, and you mentioned about prioritization and triaging, for instance. There's some discussion a little while ago in an AI system used by the police force that they were triaging on solvability of crimes. Now, I, as a victim of a crime, might not be very happy with that, and I might decide later on to sue based on that. So I suppose this opens up a huge area, but also lots of opportunities. So Wales could be maybe the first host of an AI ethics panel, for instance, on how we create these algorithms and what we do with the black box algorithms.
Yeah. So I think generally in AI, so DeepMind have a AI ethics panel who are not necessarily just looking at health. So there are lots and lots of questions around it. One of the things that's interesting is that a machine will only do what it's trained to do at the moment. So we're not, as I said, we're not talking generalizable AI. So if you give it a problem, it doesn't know that, one is a black person, one is a white person, one lives in Lisvane, one lives in Ely. It doesn't know that. It just knows data points, and it knows the outcomes of those data points. So it brings tricky questions as far as ethics. Do we say actually, whatever it thinks is true, we sort of take? And the flip side of that is that there's bias in all this data. So if you have someone who is used to diagnostics in Chelsea and Westminster, they will develop a very different diagnostic engine to someone who's worked in Merthyr. So ground truth isn't quite as straightforward a concept as the algorithm will think it is. Yes, we definitely need more ethics boards looking at health and looking at the sort of maybe the actual healthcare applications of that. I think we're going to see some around consumerism, because that will be the drive initially. But to think about how AI can be used ethically in primary and secondary care, I don't think anyone's really doing.
Emma Mason, one of the acute care physicians working in Ai and Bevan Health Board. I'm really looking forward to the future where all this is going to work perfectly, and I'm going to have lots of information about my patients, and they're going to manage their own chronic disease management, etc., etc. I'm living in the real world where I don't even have a working computer that I can use during my ward round. Yeah. So all this is going to cost money. Can we morally justify spending a large amount of funds to create this perfect world when currently I can see very few spending going in important things like public health, chronic obesity, diabetes, and mental health. So can we square that circle with what you're proposing, which is going to be 20, 30 years' time, to what we are dealing with now?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of parts of that. Are we in Wales going to have the funds to develop these very complicated AI algorithms? No, is the reality to that. So these tools, as I sort of mentioned, take a huge amount of curating, are very, very costly to develop. But there's a lot of venture capitalist interest in this field. So we will almost certainly have players outside of it developing things, getting us to a point where it does kind of work and can be used clinically. And then it's probably at that point that we actually start seeing it in our day-to-day practice. Because as you say, it's a long, long way away from frontline, clinical practice as we know it today. What I think we should remember for that question, though, is that just because it won't be used necessarily at 5 years, 10 years, whatever that is, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't start thinking about how we train people to be comfortable with that reality, because that reality will be there in their working lifetimes, in your working lifetime.
One more quick question. We can continue this conversation later. Otherwise, we're going to overrun very much. One more question.
Thank you. David, that's obviously interesting, the subject of the money and the fund for this. Just for your information, the Health Minister of Wales has advertised about funding for AI by 3 million, as I know, and there were a few applicants to that. But we are a private company. and you fund your private projects, can you commit yourself to fund Wales in AI? You mentioned that there are no sounds from regarding genomics in Wales, radio imaging. Well, we put recently something for radio imaging in our health board in your Bevan University Health Board, but unfortunately the minister or the Welsh government could not support that at that time. So can you support us financially?
So I'm an AI clinician, not a chief executive. But yes, we are definitely looking at how we can use these technologies in Wales. That's all I can say.
Thank you very much. We could discuss AI for the next many hours. I think that somebody also said to Elon Musk, why are you trying to build an electric car? We don't even have batteries, and this will never work. And so he built a battery factory. So if we really want to, there are definitely ways forward. Mark, it is a great pleasure. Can we just have one of the roving mics? Because I think Mark wants to wander around.
No, it's all right. Let's go quickly.
Is that okay? Mark Tobert is another... Am I allowed to call you an old friend?
Yes.
Mark Tobert is another old friend who is a consultant and senior lecturer in palliative care medicine, and we have crossed paths many times. And Mark's commitment to continuous medical education, also around the area of dying and coming to terms and novel ways of training, is unceasing, as I can see. And we're really looking forward to Mark talking to us about virtual reality.
Can you lead me up, Anton? I can see you naked right now.
Are you okay?
Yes, I'm okay, thank you. Thanks for asking. Hello, everyone. Now, why do I not like talking at medical education events? Well, number one, I've never done any sort of postgraduate courses in medical education. And I'm always worried about questions at the end of an event, like, where's your sigmoid learning curve? Like, I think someone mentioned it earlier. And my talks are usually immediate gratification and some degree of memorability, but they don't necessarily follow sort of trajectories of medical education. So I'm on a beach right now, a really nice beach, phobia reduction, and there's no one on this beach. It's just me. I can see the sea. It's really wonderful. I don't really want to come out, but I'm going to have to. Okay, certainly different. But yeah, today I wanted to give you a bit of an example of my forays into virtual reality as a complete novice, complete and utter novice, and how this worked out for me, and what sort of ideas and stimulations I got from it in terms of medical education. So all these things start with a bit of a story. So I, through a series of coincidences, was asked to talk at Tedx Cardiff, which is a big event in the tramshed. Some of you may have heard of TED events, where you sort of do public speaking, and you join a list of other speakers on very diverse topics like history or politics or digital. I was talking about palliative care, and I was talking about death and dying. And it was in the tramshed, and in the breakout sessions we all went to Tramshed Tech, which is next door in Cardiff, and there was a company there called Orchard Media. So what do Orchard Media do? Orchard Media work with VR and immersive technologies, in a sense. And they approached me after my talk, and they said, look, we're really interested in healthcare and working with you guys, really stimulating talk. How can we help you in palliative care? How can we help you in hospice? So in the immediate aftermath of the talk, I looked at one of their devices. They were live streaming from a 360-degree camera. So right in the middle of Tramshed Tech, they had a 360 camera, which was filming everything that was going on live around them. And this image, which I've just captured from YouTube at the weekend, just shows you that you should always be careful when there's a 360 camera around, because it does capture everything. And so I managed to get a still of me tucking into some cheese and onion crisps, and you can get the full detail of what everyone is doing. So when there's a 360 camera in the room, really look out what you're doing, because it's there for posterity. But the guys from Orchard Media sat me down, and they put one of these on me, and I was going around in a sort of zoo, looking at various animals, and I went down a zip wire, felt a little bit dizzy from that, but it's a very sort of immersive experience. And then kindly they said they'd come back a few weeks later to come to Velindre Cancer Center where I work, to have a little look what they could do and what they can help with. But in the meantime, would I have a little think on how immersive technologies might help in my setting in healthcare? So this was really helpful, because I think when you hear about VR, there is a lot of hype around, as there is with AI, as David said earlier. And sort of I'm one of the first people to be quite skeptical and sort of say, well, how does it work? But when you've experienced it, you can then take it back home and sort of think how it might actually help and influence your surroundings. So then a sort of associate colleague of mine who helps me with some of the technology and some of the website stuff that I do, came along. He came to Velindre, and he works on the Talk CPR website a lot, but he just bought some VR kit, and he said, Mark, have you tried VR? And I said, yeah, I've recently tried some. But he had this zombie game, and it was really easy to do. So you had this little cardboard kit that he put on, and you could put your smartphone in, and you could play this zombie game. Which I'm pleased to say, playing it the first time, I killed 18 zombies, which actually was a high score and better than he had done at that moment. But I don't wish to brag. However, it gave me sort of an idea of how the immersive field works, so virtual reality and how we can interact with that environment and how we can learn from it. James, this work colleague, then invited me to a closed Facebook group that everyone can apply to join, called VR Doctors. So if you go on to facebook.com/groups/VR Doctors, you can apply to become a member. They don't just take doctors, they take nurses and educators and everyone. And it's really quite a useful forum set up by Dr. Keith Grimes, and the chap on the photograph is Dr. Shafi Ahmed, who is a surgeon, billed as a VR surgeon who uses VR and AR, augmented reality, to in surgery as a sort of learning tool. And so it's a useful group to find out about events and exchange ideas, and even talk about things like infection control policies or SOPs for VR devices used in hospital or in medical education. So a real recommendation if you're interested in foraying into that area to join. What happened a few weeks later is I got an email from Wales Deanery, and they said, how do you want to spend your £3,000? And I thought immediately, what? What's £3,000? What's going on? But then I remembered that I'd won the Best Educational Supervisor Award, and with that came a bursary for £3,000 that you could spend on a course, for instance, or an MSc, or something very sensible. So I emailed back and say, what can I spend this money on? And they said, well, most people, maybe they'll go on a sort of diploma course of some sort, or they'll go for a master's in medical education. And I thought, yeah, I probably need one of those if I ever want to talk at one of these STEMI events again. But then I thought, actually, with all this stuff that I've seen recently, £3,000 is a lot of money. I might be able to ask them whether I can buy some equipment, basically. And so I completely geeked out. I went on Amazon, I compared prices, I saw how much I could get away with for £3,000, looked at all the different devices, what might work in my setting. And I sort of knew that in all hospitals, infection control policies rule everything, and so actually getting VR to patients was going to be a bit of a challenge. But if I started in the medical education arena, so if I started with medical students and SHOs and junior doctors, that might work quite well. So I had a little bit of a list of things that I wanted to do. And so I ordered some Oculus Rift, some laptops, and a 360-degree camera with a £3,000. But before that happened, of course, there was a bit of, I think there was a bit of puzzlement in the Wales Deanery office, and people talked about this and said he wants to buy lots of equipment. I mean, are we just funding his household expenses? Is he just going to fill his whole house with VR stuff? Is this right? Is this ethical? So, I mean, I had to write a proper business case about what I wanted to do. So I had to get the definition of virtual reality right, and what exactly I was going to do. I got lots of questions back. So, for instance, what's 360? What's augmented reality or AI? All of these different things that I put into my business case. Why don't you just do a normal education video like everyone else? You know, you can just watch a video. What's wrong with that? So, I mean, I addressed all those questions and tried to sort of portray. It's difficult to portray something that you've experienced and that someone else hasn't experienced, and then to sort of say, okay, you know, these are the benefits. Now, who of you in here has experienced VR, immersive VR? Okay, not that many, actually, not that many. So I hope a few of you who haven't experienced it have signed up for my afternoon session, which where you can actually experience some VR. But here's some definitions. So this is probably one of my more useful slides. Immersive media as an overall umbrella category. Then you've got mixed reality and augmented reality, which, I mean, honestly, the definitions really vary, but for me, they're pretty much the same thing. So you basically have a lens like this chap. You can sort of see through it. You can see your own environment. But it adds things into that environment. Cartoon characters or words or maybe a little Google search engine for if you're in an exam or something like that. And you've got these sort of glasses, and again, sort of mixed reality, augmented reality. Imagine in the future you might go to a hospital. You don't really know how to get to the X-ray department. There's lots of corridors and lifts and stairs and turn left and turn right. And you get one of these at reception. It said, type in, say the word X-ray, and it'll take you there. And it takes you along the corridor, and there's an arrow that turns you left and says turn left now. And that's sort of mixed reality, augmented reality, where you add something into the actual clinical setting already. Now, virtual reality, I only have £3,000. I mean, £3,000 does sound like a lot of money, but you know, virtual reality comprises responsive VR. So we heard a little bit about haptic. So when you guys all switch your smartphones on, you might get a little buzz, and there's a little sensation that you feel that my phone has actually responded, something's happening. And if you don't get that buzz, you might think there's something wrong with my phone. But that sort of haptic, that sort of interactive technology is what we're talking about sort of in gaming. And for instance, one of the first things I downloaded on the Oculus Rift was a game designed by NASA, where you go onto Mars and drive around on Mars on a rover, which is a really interesting experience. All based on photographs and the real-life experience on Mars, on this territory. And as you're going along, the VR set and your handsets actually make you feel every bump that's in the ground while you're going on the rover. So that's sort of responsive VR, if you like. But I was thinking more along the lines, my business case was revolving more around the idea of 360 cinema. So in an environment like this, where I put this on, I'm completely immersed in the environment, and I can basically walk around and do like this, and I can see the entire room. I can maybe see the sky above me and the ground and my feet and that sort of thing. So that was the idea, and this is what I went into for the purposes of the medical education that I wanted to deliver. Now, I could lie and say that I based this on some medical education relevant topics. The he-tell wheel, if you look that up on Google, wasn't out at that point yet, but Health Education England have made a foray into this area already. Their technology and enhanced learning team are looking into this, and they've created this he-tell wheel, which I've put up here. I mean, it's basic stuff if you look at it: patient-centered, service-driven. In the center is improve patient outcomes, safety, and experience. Deliver value for money. Deliver high-quality education. So all these sort of technology-enhanced learning things made into one wheel. I mean, I think we could create our own one for Wales. Don't you think, Anton? I think you could knock up a pyramid and we could call it Health Education Wales. Let's call it the Torbert-Simon Triangle. And I expect you to have done it by the end of this talk. and then we'll publish it. I'm sure we can do something similar in Wales by the end of today. But the way I just decided to define it, don't geek out too much on the snazzy equipment. I'm sure David knows what I'm talking about. But you can get a real rush when you see all this new technology, and it's fantastic, and you want to say, how can I make it fit into my existing patterns of work and teaching? But actually, no, really analyze where the deficiency perhaps in your teaching and your education are and how this technology can help. So look at it the other way around, although it's always tempting to buy the nice equipment. So I sort of had a little think and analyzed where some of my problems in teaching were coming into, and I wanted to find out how I could improve things. So there's a few of my medical students in the room today, actually, so you can sort of get feedback from them later on what they think about my teaching style. But every Tuesday, I got 2 students in the morning, and then I got another 2 students in the afternoon. They get a sort of mix of palliative and oncology teaching. We go to the wards, we do a ward round, they see patients, and they feed back to me about this. And then I usually give them a talk about nausea and vomiting management and cancer in palliative care settings. And I try and show them a linear accelerator, so a radiotherapy machine, so that they get a sort of full, rounded Wilindra Cancer Center experience. Now, that cannot always happen every single Tuesday. And so sometimes I'm on annual leave, or some of them can't make it, or they've got another tutorial, or these sort of things that happen. So one of the problems really was replicability, and some of them complained that they hadn't been able to come to the nausea and vomiting talk, that they hadn't heard it, and it had actually become quite relevant in their exam. So what do you do? Do you just make a video, or do you create sort of immersive experience? So, and in a sense, how do you create a teacher who is there every week? How can immersive media help in this? Rather than get them to play zombie games, which some of them wanted to do, and lots of them wanted to go on the roller coaster ride as well, but no, that's not what the equipment is. There's this important Wales deanery money. We need to use this and put this to good effect. So I looked elsewhere. There's a surgeon called Shafi Ahmed, who I've already mentioned, who started in 2006. I mean, do you remember when you went to surgical theatres as a medical student? And there was like 3 other medical students in there, and some clinical fellow from Italy, and 2 other people having a little look. What is the surgeon doing? There's nearly sort of a queue, and yeah. So I think a lot of you sort of nodding heads. You remember that. Actually, what he did, he just lowered the camera right above the site, a 360 camera, so you can see all of it. It feels like you're right next to the surgeon, and he live streamed it across the world. So his technique could be looked at. People were sort of, oh, right, that's how he uses it. So quite a brave thing to do in a sense. But he said, you know, there's lots of places that could do with a bit of surgical training and can learn from this. And, you know, areas with low resources, conflict zones, and various other things. These headsets are not expensive. You put it on, and you can be really immersed in the environment. And even put little arrows in and things. This is the gallbladder and whatever. So that was one area, sort of one of the practical uses. The Orchard Media team, who had met at the TED event, they came back and they came to Wilindra, and they were very helpful. They offered to do lots of work for free, and they had a very expensive camera, which was really great. Down to sort of the practical business of it all. We had a patient called Ian, and he was on first floor ward. He had a renal cell carcinoma with bony metastatic spread. He couldn't walk. He was paralyzed, and he was going to have radiotherapy over the next few days. I saw him in the morning. He was really nervous, really tired. I said, what's going on? And I said, I'm really worried about the radiotherapy. I've been worrying about it all night. I haven't had any sleep because I can't imagine what it's like. Is there lasers? Is there laser beams? And various other things. So he'd had a sleepless night, and he was quite interested in this sort of stuff. And we talked about VR and immersive technologies. And I said, you know, it'd be a really good idea if we created a VR experience in the radiotherapy suite, so that the evening beforehand you can have a little go and see what it's like from your bed, rather than having to go down and visit. And he thought that was a really good idea as well. So we put the 360-degree camera on the radiotherapy bench, and we let the linear accelerator hover around, and we basically made pretty much every mistake in the book. Okay, so no experience in doing this kind of thing. We started off in the radiotherapy waiting room, put the VR camera on a wheelchair, wheeled it through to radiotherapy. Everyone who did that got really dizzy. There was loads of patients roaming about, waiting in the waiting room. We hadn't asked anyone for consent. And and wheeled into the waiting room. And then, I mean, the biggest howler, and what's quite interesting in VR, is you can look at what people are looking at. So you can look at the hotspots and what in the 360 environment people are sort of focusing on. And, you know, what we hadn't done is sort of clear the room a little bit. And you can see there, in the corner of the room, talking about, you know, dead people and zombies and that sort of thing, but there's a body in the corner of the room. So people were saying, what the hell is this? Is this a game of Cluedo or something, you know? Where's the radiotherapy spanner somewhere? We hadn't actually gotten the resus doll out of the room. And this became sort of a talking point of the video, which initially I got quite annoyed about. I could have thought about that, could have wheeled the bloody resus doll out. But actually then became quite a quirk. And we, by the way, have now got the technology to erase that. But people, it's become quite a cult video. And so actually erasing that would sort of destroy the soul out of it maybe and take it. So no complaints about it yet, but some raised eyebrows certainly. And then next thing we did, we filmed my sort of 20-minute nausea and vomiting talk, and created sort of an immersive environment around that. So medical students could look at that even if they'd missed my tutorial or not been there on the day, so they didn't feel they missed out. And this all goes onto YouTube as well, so they can immerse themselves in the environment. That's just an idea of the sort of whole room 360 environment and other people looking bored during my talk there. So we had these two videos, and we then wanted to evaluate them. So got some medical students to feed back about this. They were really excited, and I think probably the novelty of putting on VR and stuff like that added to it as well. I don't know what you call that in medical education, if there's some novelty value to something, and there's learning based of that. I don't know if it's a sigmoid curve or concave or not sure, but yes, yeah, that's right. We'll put my name on it though, please. So cutting forward in time now, we got 72 medical students to feed back, and I got other medical students to help out in this project and junior doctors, and so we were writing this up for a journal at the moment. And you can't see the sort of comments particularly well on this slide here, but I'll read some of them out. So, two students actually answered me in the video. So they put this on, and they're hearing me talk, and I asked some questions of the people who were in the room, and they're saying, red, the color red. So I'm in the actual room, and they're sort of answering a question. So this is how immersive this actually is. I don't know if they thought this was some sort of live event or whatever, but people do get really stuck into this, and it's quite amazing to see, actually. I'll just read out one of the comments. Simplicity was key here. It really suited me, and getting the YouTube link so I can watch it later in normal or 360 format was great. So it's all on YouTube, and they get the link. Someone said, no distractions, you are in that other space, and I couldn't even look at my smartphone during the tutorial. So you really capture them, basically. This is really a new format, so without distraction, because everything, I think lecturers, and I've seen a few people sort of zone out on their smartphones here just now, so that's not possible anymore. But I was also really wanting to focus on the negatives, because this is what industry is after. So if we publish this paper, they want to see some of the negative points so that they can work on them and create programs to overcome these things. So couldn't take notes very easily in the real world when headset was on. So I always assumed I'd be some sort of old git who's using new technology, and these medical students would come along and tell me how it's done. But no, they're actually really, really traditional. They want an old-fashioned paper handout so that they can write on it. And yeah, it's amazing. So we created these handouts, and so basically what was happening is they would watch the video, and then they go a bit like this and write on the handout. And it was a real mixture of the old and the new world sort of colliding terribly. And I kept feeding this back to the developers. So there's lots of developers like AltSpace and various others who are creating these virtual meeting rooms. So you can get together, get 30 people in a room together from all over the world, blah, blah, blah. And you can hear a talk by Anton. He's in the middle of the room. His avatar is there with PowerPoint slides, etc. But as I said, can we create a sort of virtual notepad so people can write on it and then perhaps even email it to themselves and click on a link? And no one had thought about that. So there's a real sort of interesting sort of industry feedback. And some of the sort of common things, like the headset was a bit uncomfortable for some, but they hadn't adjusted the straps necessarily. Sometimes the goggles would mist up a little bit. And some people felt, and this is sort of an experience from the medical library where we have these headsets now as well, it is quite claustrophobic. So you put this on and you're really in that space essentially. And if you're alone in the library and someone suddenly you're in the thing, your headphones on, someone taps you on the shoulders. My staff actually now, if I'm in my office with one of these on, they've made a sort of custom of sort of creeping up on me and trying to freak me out as best they can when I've got these on. So it's not very pleasant, I can tell you, especially when you're playing a zombie game during work. So I've written down some of our experience here. I mean, I bought all this equipment and then it was there in my office and I looked at it and I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to get started on this. It took a month or so to get used to the equipment, visual adjustment. It does take a lot of time. Lots of initial hiccups and amateur errors, including file names for videos needing a underscore 360 ending so that the Oculus would actually pick it up. And we didn't know that. So you go to the VR Doctors Forum and those questions are sort of answered. So you need help with this sort of thing. But once it was set up, really positive experience, I was able to occasionally take annual leave and my teaching would still continue with my virtual self in a sense, so people didn't feel shortchanged. And other people in the Cancer Center have seen this now. Professor Richard Adams, one of the oncologists, now also has done a video because he knows that he can't be there every Tuesday for medical school teaching. And so he's filmed himself in the CT radiotherapy planning suite, talking to another medical student, showing people around. And so it's catching on, actually. Popular with core trainees and registrars who now access our medical library to view these 360 videos. And we've actually done case-based discussions where on the ward we've talked about a patient with nausea and vomiting. I've then said to the SHOs, go down to the medical library, go do the nausea and vomiting tutorial, then come back to me, we'll discuss it, and then we'll do a workplace-based assessment. Nice to experience actual probably the first medical library in the world to offer a VR sort of education experience. Welsh Government is actually looking into this, so they've funded a few projects in different areas. A Welsh language virtual reality experience helps users understand dementia, for instance. So you might find that in pockets in your own areas when you go back, these sort of VR things are starting to pop up. And I hope this talk has given you a bit of armory to sort of understand what is 360, what is immersive, etc., etc. We're looking at the world of gaming, and I've made some contacts with people in the gaming industry. So imagine creating sort of a hospital game, essentially, where you go and have to do a paracentesis procedure perfectly, or you'll see in my talk this afternoon, a few sort of stress tests where you kind of go into a pediatric emergency room and you get lots and lots of distractions, sort of parents shouting at you, paramedics saying, what have you done, and various things to see if you withstand some of the pressures. And it is really quite real. But you can also practice and assess soft skills in VR with feedback. For example, angry relatives in an A&E, or leadership skills, teaching. So what I'm going to... This is helped me actually collaborate with some other people. So the cystic fibrosis unit in Llandoch, they're really looking into VR, and they're really interested in this. And one of the psychologists is going to do a talk with me, and this is perhaps something for the next STEMI conference next year, where we look at leadership skills in medical education. So there's a VR where you put on the VR headset and you take a lift. You're in New York, there's lots of skyscrapers around you. You take a lift up to the top of the skyscraper, and then off the top of the skyscraper there's a wooden plank which looks a bit rickety. And you're sort of on this and you're sort of walking the plank, and you can see all the traffic down there around you, and it's all very real and all very visual. And we want to sort of show that about 50% of people can't manage this because it's so real, and people vertigo. It's horrible. I mean, I tried it, but with a bit of leadership coaching, so you could have someone who's like, "Come on, don't be such a wuss, walk out on the plank," etc., etc. That usually doesn't work so well. But with a good leader, a good communicator, can sort of coach you and say, "Look, to be honest, 50% of people can't do this, so don't worry if you can't do this, but take a little step forward, see what you can do, etc., etc." So you can try out different medical leadership styles and see what you can do. So these are some of the areas that we're looking into. Patient experience as well. We've recently filmed the Penarth Hospice. A lot of inpatients in our hospital sort of worry terribly about what is the hospice like? Is this a really dark, dreary place, with like a nursing home? But actually then you sort of take them into an immersive experience around the hospice. They meet some of the staff. They see the lovely views of the Bristol Channel and hear someone talk about the hospice. So it's a really nice thing that we hope to develop. Yeah, and that's all I've got to say, really. Sort of one of the other problems with this very immersive technology is when I was preparing this presentation at the weekend, I did my presentation on the laptop, but then occasionally I wanted to put on the virtual reality headset to try things. And just 20 seconds, and the little one is already on the computer messing around with my presentation. So it's so immersive, you have to be really careful, especially with little children in the house. So thank you for listening. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you.
That was truly immersive. Surely you've got some questions for Mark about practicalities. Have we got a microphone? There you are, Nicola. Thank you. Just in the front
here. So my name is Stefan Schwartz. I'm a radiologist at the Heath. I was just wondering, could we use this, or there are some usages or experiences using this for conferences like today. If I could imagine in the future, don't have to travel here, I can just put on these funny glasses and stay wherever I am.
Wir können auch auf Deutsch reden, oder?
Ah ja.
Das versteht dann keiner, aber ja, also für Konferenzen kann man das schon benutzen. Das ist kein Problem. Und das wird schon gemacht, ne? Also das machen schon einige. Sorry. I'm just doing what you guys always do when you're abroad. It's already happening. So you put a 360 camera up in a sort of hotspot. I mean, the Wales Millennium Centre, the Opera House, in their prime seats they've put a few 360 cameras now, and you get really good audio, and you can experience an opera from some of the best seats in the house. So. It'll definitely change probably as a travel around conferences, which, sometimes if you think about it, to give a 5-minute talk in Hawaii, does burn up a lot of carbon, but definitely a good use. Yeah. Maybe one for next year, Anton.
Dr. Sabat, thank you very much. My name's Shajam, I'm a paediatric trainee. You alluded to in your talk that one of the problems with new technology is that it's used for the sake of it rather than actually with sound reasoning and justification and planning. And clearly the real advantage of this is to be able to do things that a normal video wouldn't be able to do. Yeah. So you've hinted to a few things, but where do you really think that we could use this in the coming years in our own practice throughout all of these different specialties? What do you think we can see and do that we can't just do with the normal video? And something like the plank over New York City, what do you think the applications that would be for us?
I mean, it's a very good question, and I think you can only know that in your own area if you've experienced VR, because that's where the creativity comes in, I think. And I spent those £3,000 very rapidly, and I probably made lots of errors along the way. And I think sometimes we as medics, as someone alluded to earlier, we try to be too perfect, and we try and plan everything in huge amounts of detail so that no one can say later, oh, you shouldn't have spent that money, and you made all these errors, and you could have planned that in advance. Actually, we do probably have to make mistakes and immerse ourselves, throw us into it a little bit. And I think that comes with the AI thing as well. We have to sort of try things out to see the real errors, so really stress test them. So that's what I was essentially, I think, doing, is stress testing this application for my world, for palliative care. And I saw some of the deficiencies, so I saw some of the YouTube videos that were out there, and I wasn't really sure I was going to show those to patients because they weren't that relevant to my practice. So I wanted to be able to create something for cheap with a 360 camera, and they cost about £70 now, those 360 cameras, so you can buy one and do it yourself. A lot of smartphones can do that now as well. Just to replicate something in my environment that I felt was important. So actually showing someone the hospice properly, who's actually not that mobile and can't just visit the hospice just like that, for instance. That was one of the things from my world. In pediatrics, I'm sure you could actually, because it's quite stressful, I'm sure, at times at night, you could actually get trainees to have a little look at a sort of typical scenario at night and maybe create a game, that you can play and sort of see some typical scenarios, and maybe integrate into that game how you would want the trainees to respond. So lots of areas, and I'd urge you to try out VR, have a little go, and see what it could actually bring to your own area, and perhaps think about some of the deficiencies in your areas where experiencing something in virtual for the first time round is perhaps safer than doing the old see one, do one, teach one technique.
One more question back. Don't want to keep you from lunch.
Well, thank you, Dr. Talbot, for a great talk, and what I like to think of as some gentle ribbing about my comments about the sigmoid learning curve. There is a basis behind it. Go and look at my poster, vote for me. Let me bat that right back at you, though, that sort of thing, and just sort of say, have you got any metrics on how well, not just how well this has been received, you've clearly shown positive comments, but have you got any hard data on improved retention on a VR lecture versus just a straight YouTube video? Yeah. Because otherwise it does strike me that you're sort of just over-egging the experience. Yeah. You're preaching to the converted, and certainly people who are open to new ways of thinking. Doubtless there are little nuances in the VR that might improve someone's experience and someone's overall, but have you been able to sort of measure that or even identify those sort of things yet?
So with the 17 medical students, due to time factors and time restraints, we were only able to do a survey, so a post-VR survey, and they sort of graded the experience, and my medical students and some of the junior doctors are going through that data at the moment to sort of give us an initial idea, and especially some of the free comment sort of feedback, the positive and the negative, which you've seen some examples of. But I work with a lot of people who are very close to the medical education agenda, and they sort of say, well, Mark, you could probably improve this a bit next time round if you sort of actually do something along medical retention, where you sort of, in terms of the learning, have they remembered it immediately after the VR experience, maybe do a little test, and then maybe 2 months later you can do another test. And so that's something that I'm very open to. Probably haven't got the time to do completely by myself, so I'd maybe have a look around this room and see if people want to contact me or email me if they want to sort of get involved with that sort of thing. So I know how the technology works now. Now I need other people who've got a bit of time or time commitment to actually do some proper medical education research on this, and maybe one for the next year's STEMI conference to then sort of focus on and look at.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, I'm sure we have much, much, much more to discuss, but we can do that, hopefully, over lunch and continue this very, very stimulating conversation. I think that we will break for lunch. You will remember that we will start with the workshops, let's say 1:45, 20 to 2. And you remember that you go to your workshops, and then there'll be a 20-minute break in between workshops, and after your second workshop, you are free to go home and reflect some further. Thank you very much, everybody.